here's what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to try and tell you a little bit about what's going on in the economy. And you might ask, why is that tech guy getting up talking about the economy? Because in the end, it drives IT. IT investment in the end is driven by what happens in the broader economy. And there's a fairly big dichotomy between what's going on in the consumer business and what goes on in all of our businesses, and I'll describe that to you. We'll talk a little bit about what business leaders, all of us in the end, are working for boards or working for leaders that are trying to get things done. They have expectations, and we'll talk about why those are difficult, because again, those set the tone for why we do the things that we do. Talk about this thing you always hear over talked about called the cloud, and I'm here to tell you, this is not going to be about just technology. So I'm going to tell you why the cloud is not really just a technology. Frankly, it's more of a strategy. It's more of a business model. It's more of a way of thinking about how things are going to get done, and we'll talk about that. We'll then talk about our strategy, and then I'm going to share with you, since most IT organizations, you probably know about 60-70% of IT organizations now actually report into finance, report into the CFO. And I'll tell you some predictions about where this industry, our industry, the IT industry, is headed over the next several years. That's what I'm going to try to get done in roughly 40 minutes. Hopefully I can get prisoners to uncross their arms and get vacationers engaged. All right, that's my objective. A lot of data on one chart. Let me try to summarize it for you. GDP over the past several years, last 5 years, not great. Couple of percent growth. This is great to be in a room with people that may understand numbers. Most times I talk to IT people who say, I have no idea what you're talking about, but worldwide GDP, roughly 75 trillion. A couple of percent growth is 1.5 trillion. Sounds like a lot of money, but you got to take 40% of that out, because 40% of that growth occurs in China. And not a lot of companies have exposure to China unless they're extremely global. If you don't, it's really 60% of that growth, or really less than $1 trillion, which may sound like a lot of money. But for companies to grow, you got to take that less than $1 trillion and you got to spread it across all the companies in the world. And that's the way for them to generate revenue growth. And if they don't grow revenue, lots of other things happen. In IT, look at the chart that would be on your lower left or your upper right, and that's the dichotomy of IT. Consumer IT is growing like crazy. It's now half of all IT. If you're like me and you've been in this industry, as unfortunately Mark dated me 30 years, I never knew a world where consumer IT was bigger than business IT. It will occur this year. Consumer IT growing 22, 23%, now over $1 trillion in spend. And you've got a problem now with the business side basically flat over the last 5 years. And it's now roughly $1 trillion. Consumer IT, bigger than business IT, growing materially faster. Not a lot of investment in business IT, lots of investment in consumer IT. Simultaneously, corporate performance, not only has corporate performance been bad, if you don't know, this isn't on a chart, but the S&P 500, you've heard of this group of companies, 500 biggest companies. Revenue growth over the last 5 years, anybody know? Average revenue growth? 1%. 1%. This crazy stock market, when it goes to 26,000 and you say, why? I'll give you my answer. I can't explain it to you. It's unexplainable. So it's certainly not based on revenue growth. Earnings growth has been 5%, while the revenue has been 1%, which means what? All of us as companies are doing what? Lowering our expenses. And you and anybody who's in finance, you know that all too well. And of course, that affects IT, which is obviously a big part of what you see in that upper right, I've got to keep looking around, upper right box. Same time, if you don't know this stat, I'll give you one stat to take away. 2000, Fortune 500. How many Fortune 500 companies are left since 2000? Half. Half are gone. Half are gone. So whatever company you work for, no matter who it is, if you think your brand is impervious to change, to interruption, to whatever it may be, no. No. Half gone. That's only in a period of 16 years. Bankruptcies, M&A, typically poor performance of one type or another generates the extinction of a company. And I use some examples. I mean, think about 10 years ago, how many people went to Blockbuster? How many people went this last weekend to Blockbuster? Anybody? If you do, I want to know who you are. I want to know how that went. How many people went to Borders this week? I mean, you can go on and on and on. Companies that just went away. I mean, if you look at the end of the day, Blockbuster got disintermediated by Netflix, really, just streaming video. I mean, what happened to Borders? Who beat them? Amazon, exactly. So you wound up in a situation where technology disintermediated the incumbent. And by the way, when that started, did it take a long time? 2-3 years, cradle to grave, blowing and going to extinct. So speed of which this happened. So I build this up for you to tell you sort of how corporate performance and the pressure on corporate performance is real. It's here, it's now, and it's accelerating. Next chart. This is maybe good news. So while I gave you sort of bad news on GDP, that's sort of circa the end of 2016. All the books aren't written on 2017 yet, although the estimate, and the way you would read this chart, the way I would read it, geez, there are a lot of numbers on this chart. The way I would read it was, sorry, I need these. Take the 74.49, do you see that number? It's the 2012 GDP number. And then compare that to the 79281. So that tells you got a little less than 5 trillion worth of growth over a period of basically 6 years. That's that number I gave you earlier, right? Less than $1 trillion per year, but imagine some big percentage of that was in one country. And by the way, their numbers are a little shaky. So when you go look at those numbers overall, you got to split that money up between all of our companies to go grow revenue. That's the backdrop of what we had to deal with. And you can see the numbers up and down, but the real core of it is it's basically flat. It's basically flat. Now, what you see if you go to the gray, it doesn't sound like much, but go look at what happens when GDP growth grows to 3 to 4%. Compare the 79,281 to the 84,375. Wow. 1 year, I got $4 trillion. This is a big, big change if it happens. And for somebody who follows this stuff, which, may not be all that interesting to a lot of people, I find amazing that if what you can see right now, the big issue isn't tax cuts, the big issue isn't job growth, it's the fact that we potentially can see a big change in worldwide economy. And it's showing up, starts here in the US. The US has now had 2 quarters in a row of 3% plus GDP growth. Forget the politics of it, forget all the other stuff associated with it. At the end of the day, if you get 3% GDP growth, just in this country, you get $600 billion worth of growth, which means we can expand. You can expand, you build more, you invest more, you hire more, and frankly, what's good for us, we invest in IT, which I'm going to tell you in a second, we need the investment, and I'll tell you why as we go. So GDP, big potential, and you're going to see this over the next 6 months. I think this plays out over a relatively short period of time. And now if you don't know this, and I'll just leave this as a factoid for you, in the US, I would not believe these 4% unemployment numbers. I know most people here are from the US, and just a moment that may not make you feel good when I say it, but it is meant to be a real badge of honor for, I think, the country's productivity. There's about 10, 11% of the men in the age bracket 44, 45 to 53, 54 who aren't working right now. Not working. They're not trying to work, so therefore they don't show up in the unemployment number. And the fact is, if this economy can grow at that rate, with that segment of the population not working, tells you the incredible, that line that says increasing productivity, the productivity in this country is like what's never been seen before in any economy in the history of the planet. So if this 4% GDP happens, big time change in what goes on, starting in the US and probably extends its way across the world. And gosh, hope it spreads to Europe, because Europe has been flattish to 1% GDP growth since 2008. Frankly, it's been struggling to even get 1% GDP growth. All right, next chart. This is what goes on for companies. And the reason I want to tell you the GDP numbers is the poor CEO, I'm empathetic to CEOs, but as a group, you get fired for these 4 reasons. I couldn't grow revenue. And by the way, is it easy to grow revenue based on what I just told you? No. There's less than $1 trillion to go spread around between everybody from Pfizer to Oracle to every SMB in the world. And I got to spread that to everybody and keep everybody happy by growing revenue. So generally speaking, the way to grow revenue, you got to steal somebody else's business. I got to steal their customers. Meanwhile, I got bad news. I got to steal their customers while I don't lose mine. Hard work. Almost everybody's going to lower their spend while they do it. I'll be surprised there is a company in here who would raise their hand. I'm not going to do the pop quiz. How many people here are accelerating their expense structure materially? You may be investing in some things while you're cutting others, but generally nobody who just says, I'm just going to expand my cost structure, and we'll talk about that in a second, about how almost every company is doing both at the same time. Thirdly, I have to improve cash flow / earnings, whichever metric you like. And now there's another risk, and it's particularly true for people in the IT area. If you got a board of directors like we do, and because we're a technology company, I probably don't get the question the way that non-tech companies would, but almost every board is asking CEOs today, hey, what are you doing about being hacked? I don't want to be on a board of a company who's about to be hacked. Are we going to get hacked? And CEO says, no, we're not going to get hacked. And what do you think the CEO does? Talks to the CEO, hey, are we going to get hacked? And I want to make sure we don't get hacked. Have we done a study about getting hacked? And all of this kind of stuff. And so this may sound a bit trite, but at the end of the day, it gets people fired. I mean, look at the poor situation at Equifax. I'll explain that and others in a second. But actually, not getting penetrated turns out to be really hard. And it's now as big a risk, reputational brand risk, as big a deal as these other 3 fundamentals. And in the end, you have to innovate your business, right? Long run, the ability to innovate comes down to, I got to find new business models. I have to find new ways to do business. We'll talk about that in a second. I got to invent new products. For anybody, and that's another choice. Remember, I'm going to tell you this in a second, though, but CEOs don't last that long. They actually have very short shelf lives. 18 months in some cases, short to maybe 4.5 years. On average, 4.5 years, you sit in the chair. So if I want to build new products, I got to do it fast. I don't have a lot of time for long product cycles. I have to do better service. I have to be better customer experiences. Not many choices in the end if I want to grow market share. Okay, next chart. This is this poor CEO, and a nice picture of a guy who's under a lot of stress. 18 quarters. So 4.5 years is the average. If you got more than 18 quarters, like me, you're on borrowed time. Any minute, you could be out. And it's for all of the reasons I just described earlier. And by the way, for all of you, I won't take another pop quiz. How many people in the room want to be a CEO? Oh yeah, very attractive job. And it's a very attractive job. Sounds good, and trust me, sounds better than it is. Nobody here, this poor guy, nobody here to help this guy. Nobody helped this guy. I want to help this guy, but nobody wants to help this guy. Board doesn't really care as long as the company, they just want to be on a board that performs. So alone, typically alone, I'm unique in that I've got a pretty strong team around me. I have a CEO with me, Safra Katz. I've got Larry, who's our founder. That is extremely rare in this world. Most of the time, this CEO is by themselves. The technology they have stinks. The average application in this country is over 20 years old. 20 years old. Can you imagine take 2018 to 20 years from 2018? Do you know what you get, Paul? What is, it's not tough. Steve, can you do that math? See, this is not a finance group. These are mostly the Oracle people. They struggle with this. So I'm going to help. I'm going to help. If you take 2018, Ivgen, do you know that? Yes, 1998. It's very good. So this is, we're getting better. So 19, can you imagine how we roll up a forecast, right? So 20 from 2000. All right, so 1998 is when most of these apps were built on average. So you go say, what was not around in 1998? Oh, internet, social, mobile. Can you imagine building a bunch of apps and I hadn't thought of this internet thing. That's a big deal. Hadn't thought of mobile. Wow. People have phones and all this stuff. This is great. So, but I didn't think about that when I wrote these apps. These apps are really, really old. Worse yet, they're really hard to maintain. Most have been customized. Most are now sort of orphaned, and they're very expensive to keep up. As a result, IT budgets in general, over 80% of them, or 80% of the budget, is for maintenance, to keep the status quo, to keep the old status quo. So old apps running on old infrastructure, and I don't have enough money to really change the answer. Why not? For what I just said. What I just said about the pressure on revenue growth. I'm cutting expenses. I can't increase my expenses. And result, I can't invest. Meanwhile, we have all these disruptors on the doorstep for the CEO. I'm running a hospitality business and Airbnb shows up. Jeez, this is bad news. These guys have no overhead, no cost structure, basically run a gig model. They sort of do everything through technology. I've got a traditional model, and I don't have enough money to invest in a new model. And you could go through this with these other examples, industry by industry by industry. Disruptors at the doorstep, not a lot of raw revenue growth to leverage off of, very old IT that stops me from really taking advantage of retaining my existing customers, getting new customers, and grabbing more efficiency, which is going to keep this CEO in the job. Now, for those of you who think that CEOs come to work every day and go to bed every night thinking nobly, generationally, about how the business is going to change, I don't want to be the one to burst your bubble, but I am today. Most CEOs start with a thought process about surviving, getting through this, getting through quarter to quarter, getting through it year to year. In these public markets today, and you see it virtually every day, if you don't deliver every quarter, you don't deliver every 6 months, every year, there's some set of people that will come calling for your head. So as a result, the ability to think in 5-year and 10-year stretches is extremely limited. My best advice, if you're not public, don't go public. Because doing transformations in the public markets, really, really difficult. Have I confused anybody so far? Yes, I see, yes. Prisoners in the back. Yes, I'm confused, I don't want to be here. All right, next chart. I'm going to skip this only because I want to talk about it in the context of a different issue, and I'm going to talk about security and why it is really such a big issue today in the context now of the CEO. Let's go to the next chart. This is where I live. This is, and I don't do it to give you a travelogue, but Highway 101 runs up north-south in Silicon Valley, and Highway 280 runs north-south in the Silicon Valley. And they really sort of border the tech infrastructure of the valley. Now, I'm going to tell you a quick story, and I'm going to dial it back to late 1980s. And in the 1980s, late in the 80s, if you think about technology, the stack of technology started with basically processors, microprocessors. And the leader in microprocessors in that time frame Steve, do you know who the leader in microprocessors was in the late 1980s? IBM. Do you know who the leader in database was in the late 80s? IBM. See, he's gotten every question wrong so far, and I'm just going to run you. I'm going to run you through the stack. By the way, you're going to get a rhythm around this. The leader in microprocessors in the late 80s was. Let's try again. IBM. The leader in operating systems in the 80s was. You've got it. Leader in database. You got it. The leader. There was no middleware. They had management tools, is sort of what it was called, reporting tools, all of this, and the leader was IBM. Applications, there weren't really any commercial applications in those time frames, right? Almost all were homegrown, built by the customer along with the services from IBM. This is a big company, very important company. The guy who founded the company was a guy named Thomas Watson. He worked for the company I first worked for, NCR. Watson invented the word quota. You ever heard sales quota before? You know who invented that? Thomas Watson. You know the word fired? So we talk about it all the time. Oh, guy got fired. In fact, there's a guy who's a very senior political figure in the country who uses the word a lot. And so, you know who invented that word? Watson. Watson's theory was if you didn't make quota, you would take your desk, they would take the desk of the person that made the quota and put it outside. And they would then they'd set it on fire. What happened to you? I got fired. Watson invented all of this stuff. There was no corporate recognition programs invented by Watson. I'll tell you one last Watson story. In about 1910, this is how long ago this was, before IBM was ever started, the CTO at NCR was a guy named Charles Kettering. Kettering, you've heard of Sloan Kettering hospitals? Okay. The head of a carriage company at the time was a guy named Alfred Sloan. Kettering invented the electric starter on a cash register so that you didn't have to crank it. The guy who owned NCR at the time fired Kettering because he was sort of an eccentric inventor. And he started a company, because it was in Dayton, Ohio, called the Dayton Electric Company. That became Delco. Delco then merged with the carriage company, with Sloan's carriage company, and they became General Motors. They had no way, because now you could put a starter onto the carriage and move the carriage. They didn't know how to sell these carriages, these electric carriages. So Sloan said, we need somebody who can sell these things. Who should we get? Kettering said, I have one idea. Watson. He knows what he's doing. Watson said, no, I'm in the middle of this startup called Remy. I can't remember what the name of it was at the time, but it became IBM. He said, but what I'll do is I'll go home this weekend and I'll write you a couple of pages as like a strategic plan on what to do. Watson writes the plan. It basically becomes the plan for NCR to create sales branches around the world. Sell locally, build products centrally, sell them globally. They gave it to Kettering. Kettering shows it to Sloan. He says, this is great, but we have no money. They asked Watson to come visit. He said, I got an idea. Don't own them. Franchise them. What did that become? The GM dealer network. This company invented fractional geometry. This is the greatest company perhaps in the history of the country. Right? And I'm not an IBM fan because I don't like them for many reasons competitively, but it's a great company. Late 1980s, what happened? Customers got tired of the leverage the company had. The Department of Justice got involved, and you found the company also simultaneously began to lose its technical lead. That lead I just described got changed by this valley in between 101 and 280. The lead in microprocessors, now I'll ask, who's the leader in microprocessors, Steve? Now. Very good. This is really good. The leader in database now? Oracle. This is all good. I could take you through the entire stack, and those leadership changes, those leadership categories have changed. Worse yet in the context of my commentary is going to be, it isn't just one company. It's one new leader, but also multiple companies in each category. So what happened over 25 years is the entire stack disintermediated. And multiple players in each category emerged, all coming from this, almost all coming from this little area. And what do customers do? They started to buy them like piece parts. They bought them almost like a Lego set. Different operating systems, different databases, different pieces of middleware, different servers. A procurement, if you're in finance and you like procurement, this is a procurement leader's dream. I'm going to send everybody else and have them beat each other's brains out, get the lowest price I can. What emerged? Big IT staffs. Big IT staffs to do what? Put all this stuff together. And then guess what else emerged? By the way, I know there's a lot of systems integrator fans here, but a $200 billion industry called systems integration. Why? To support the IT staffs. This all emerged with the breakup of really the core stack of IBM. This became really, really expensive. Really hard. And as you look back 25 years later, you say, was this breakup a good thing or a bad thing? I'm here to argue, I'm not sure it was good. I think what's happened is we built these incredibly heterogeneous, extremely disparate, extremely complicated, hard to upgrade, hard to maintain, and frankly, quite dangerous environment. Nothing, and if you ask the question back to security, you get that poor Equifax guy up in front of Congress and have a congressperson say, why is this damn thing so hard? Well, it turns out it's really difficult when you have to patch something that's got almost 150 permutations. And you have to do it while you keep everything else running. And it turns out it's more complicated than you can ever imagine. And this is because of this environment we built, partially done by the Silicon Valley, partially driven by what's occurred by customers' desire to leverage procurement that in the end has created what I will tell you is an unsustainable, absolutely unsustainable environment. Unsustainable and unaffordable. Next chart. And that's why this is going to change. This is a lot bigger than when you hear about cloud technologies. This is a lot bigger than about technical stuff. This, frankly, has as much to do with the CEO and the CFO and how you think about running the business. Where do you want to put your money? Do you want core competencies in provisioning servers? Or do you want core competencies in retaining customers? Do you want core competencies in patching databases? Or do you want core competencies in gaining market share? These contexts are all shifting in the marketplace. And that's why it isn't just about cloud. This is why this is a generational shift that I promise you is irreversible. There's a lot of inertia in IT to stop it from happening. Why? This affects a lot of people's lives and careers. A lot of people don't want this to happen. Inertia is always our biggest enemy. Status quo is our enemy for change. A lot of people in the community that helps people continue to customize applications that don't want this to change. There's a lot of vendors that can't help you move that don't want this to change. And yet, it's going to change. Why? Simple reasons. And they aren't really technical. It simply costs less. There's more innovation. You don't have to do the work. It's more secure. You shift the risk. By the way, since I'm being fairly candid, I think, this afternoon, I had a CEO in this country, very big company, Fortune 20, asked me the question about patching. So CEO, this is a CIO, CEO, tell me why it takes us so long to patch all this stuff. It's taking, my IT staff tells me it takes 4 months for us cradle to grave to patch. And of course, my inner monologue is thinking, that's pretty good. Pretty good. A lot of our customers are 10, 12 months to get cradle to grave to patch. And he's all worked up. He's worked up into a frenzy. He's like, this is unbelievable. It's unsustainable. It could sink our brand, cost me my job. You know, I'm like, yeah, no, I get it. I get it. He says, if I have to go in front of the U.S. Congress, I don't want to say too much more about who it is. He said, if I have to go in front of the U.S. Congress and talk about this, If I have to say it takes us 3 to 4 months because of our IT staff, and we're slow to do this and slow to do that, and we have all these configurations and all this stuff, we're screwed. Here's what I want to do. I want to get up if I have a problem, and I want to blame absolutely everything on you. And I want to say I did exactly what Oracle told me, and then we had a problem. Or insert Microsoft. I want to put one of those brands up, but I can't do it because my IT staff can't patch. This is a different environment. That problem goes away. If you just solve that problem and it didn't cost less and it wasn't more innovation, you'd have a bunch of people moving. But the fact is, you're going to get Steve, when Steve's up, you're going to talk a lot about AI and integration of AI. You're going to get emerging technologies that are now engineered directly into these apps. It's going to be more secure, it's going to cost less, and you're going to get more innovation simultaneously. It's an irresistible force. The question, as it says here, is not if, but when this all happens. And I'll give you some dates on when this is all going to happen. Next chart. This is sort of, it's too much stuff on a chart. But frankly, why this ERP piece of the business, if there's anything, well, I probably made a lot of mistakes, but one of them that I didn't understand probably back in 2011 or 12 was how fast this ERP market would move. I think popular thinking was you bought an ERP from one of the 2 big ERP companies, from SAP or Oracle, and you just never change it. You never change it for 50 years. So don't even think about it. That's not what happened. It's not what's happening. It's moving faster than we probably ever thought. Just to give you some context, we have roughly 20,000 on-premise customers. We're up, what do you say now, 6,000 or so, in the cloud, and that's in basically a 2.5-year, 3-year rollout period. It's incredible. And by the way, our user base is just now really in our pipeline. I think 30-40% of our user base is at this point considering some type of move to the cloud. That's how fast this is going, and I would never have predicted that speed. And the reason why, cost benefits, eliminating data centers. We have many companies today, and I'll tell you this in prediction-wise in a second, data centers are going away. I don't know any CEO that says, I think our core competency should be running data centers. That issue is now moving from companies to who? To people like us. We announced yesterday the opening of a whole bunch of new data centers. Why? Because customers are closing theirs. Consulting fees, customization, all of that goes away. Operating expenses go down, reallocating of resources. I already talked about patching. Business benefits. I had a keynote yesterday at an event where I had the CEO of Caesars with me, Mark Hurd, and he's just implemented Oracle Cloud Financials. And these are some of the stats he was talking about. In fact, he talked about his audit fees are down more than 20%. They ran the company on 2,000 spreadsheets that are now gone. Spreadsheets gone. His routine tasks, error tasks, now down to less than 1%, closing 50. I mean, you can read all these. I mean, these are real significant, measurable productivity benefits that come along with doing all this, but you got to be willing to spend less money while you do it. You spend less money, you gain incremental productivity simultaneously while you're more secure. And that's why this has picked up the momentum that it has. Next chart. Skip that. All right, let me tell you a little bit about what's going to happen in our industry. We did these predictions. Let me say we, because a lot of people at Oracle don't want to claim they were any part of this. I did these predictions about 2.5 years ago, and if any of you were at Open World, which I'm sure you weren't, I caught a lot of crap for this. Don't know what I'm talking about. This will never happen. This is self-serving, all this stuff. So, and this is sort of what I said. 80% of production apps will be in the cloud by 2025. 2 SaaS suites will have 80% share. Number of corporate-owned data centers will decrease by 80%. Remember, I said this in 2014, 2015 probably? 15, yeah. 80% of IT budgets will be spent on the cloud. You can read all this. I hope you can. Yeah, you should be able to read most of that. So this is what I said, and lots of sustained criticism for a lot of these, which is just fine. This is, I think, what's going to be proven first in general is that I was right. Second, so I just want to make sure I get that clear before I go into a couple caveats. If there's anything, and it's, by the way, I'm not going to say that just because I said so. I'm actually going to show you some data. But in addition to that, if there's anything I'm wrong on, as over the past 2.5 years as sort of played out, that 2025 might be too late. That the acceleration of some of this is faster than what I predicted. Let's go to the next chart. This is some new predictions that I've just added to it this week. I haven't seen the sustained criticism yet, but more than 50% of all the enterprise data will be managed autonomously, meaning nobody will touch it. Nobody will touch it. The data will be in databases driven by machine-to-machine AI, whatever term you want to use, self-managed, self-tuned, et cetera, et cetera. Autonomous enterprise data. Even regulated industries will move 50% of their production workloads to the cloud. 90% of all enterprise applications will be integrated with AI. Steve will talk to you about that in a second. The top ERP company will own more than half the market. Let's go to the next chart. This is sort of the cost today of running on-premise data warehouses. Is just one example. By the way, I could have used lots of examples. I just used this example. Half the cost when it gets driven autonomously. Machine learning means no human labor. You don't touch it. No human error. Autonomous databases automatically provision everything, monitor everything, recover, update, and they patch, and they do it while they're running. Downtime, even with we're releasing an autonomous database just as we speak. The amount of downtime we commit to because of the architecture of it is 30 minutes per year. Per year. And you eliminate all the cost, up the performance, and remember that patch latency we talked about, whether it's 0 to 12 months, 0 to 4 months, whatever number you want, it goes to 0. 0. Now, it may prove that I come back and say, and you can see what I did. I said 2020 instead of 2025, because the last time I did these and I said 2025, I thought 2.5 years ago I was pretty aggressive. And it turns out not so much. Next chart. By the way, this is a tough one that I thought about whether I should put this out in public, but in the end I decided to. Of exploits that had a patch available for more than a year, 85% of those exploits had a patch available for more than a year. So when somebody says, who do you think the bad guys are looking to penetrate? They're not looking to penetrate the most fortified places in the world. They actually follow the path of least resistance. Let me go to the place that aren't the professional IT organizations that don't have the best cyber fighters. I'm going to find the places with the most amount of places to exploit, patch latency. I'm going to go attack them. It ain't complicated. It's what they do, and they're really good at it. And the thought that you have to come back and say, that patch was available for a year. Now you ask yourself, why don't people do it? Again, it's really hard. I have to coordinate everything. I have to cold patch or hot patch. If I cold patch, I have to take systems down. I have to patch for multiple things at multiple times. If I can coordinate all that, this is complicated. And as a result, because of the Lego set, it's really difficult to do. 74% of companies take more than 3 months to do it. I gave you the example I told you, more than 3 months. We have a lot of customers taking a year. All of this gets changed when this stuff gets driven autonomously. Next chart. I don't know if I'll cover this so much as in regulated industries, banking, pharma. We now have capabilities available to deliver cloud while doing it behind firewalls, something we couldn't do 2 or 3 years ago. And now you'll find that even regulators will get this. I hope there's nobody here who's a regulator by trade. I was in a meeting with a regulator 4 years ago, and this guy, I got invited by a CEO. I thought this was going to be cool because I get to see how the regulators think. This didn't turn out to be so cool. The regulator explained to me how the computer with the data needed to be in this physical data center. And as long as the computer with the data was in this physical data center, it was okay. I spent a lot of time trying to explain to this regulator that's not the way technology works. It isn't a physical asset. I can't put a handle on the data and then move the data. He said, you don't really understand. I said, exactly, I don't understand. So he said, listen, the computer with the data has to be in this data center. So I got that the first time. So I explained to him, I said, let me just make sure I got this straight. If there was a wall and the Oracle data center was on one side and this bank was on the other side, you're saying it's okay, and we shared the wall. It's okay if it's right on that other side of the wall, and the wall's 2 inches thick. He said, exactly. It's got to be on this side of the wall. Okay, got it. From there, we developed the capability to now deliver our cloud behind the other side of the wall. And we manage. This will change regulated industries, and you'll see a shift of 50% of those workloads to the cloud by 2020, and you can see it already happening. Next chart. When Steve talks a little bit about AI, I think AI will evolve differently than you're hearing it today. I don't think there will be an AI solution. I think this thing about sending AI to the cloud and the cloud's thinking great thoughts and sending stuff back to you, I don't think this will evolve that way. I think this, you will see the capability of the technology integrated directly into the applications. I think you will see AI integrated into an HR application. How do I recruit better because I know more? How do I optimize my supply chain? And AI will come as features of those applications that actually puts you in a position to better run your business. I can now deliver location-based offers, but I can do it because the computer does the work. Not only does the computer does the work, it does it really, really fast. The computer also does it really, really accurately. One thing we will have to be careful of with AI is is really only as good as the data it has, so we'll optimize a lot of history. So we'll still require leadership and so forth, but there is so much the computer can do to help advance productivity in all of these applications. All right, next chart. I'm going to leave this chart because this is going to happen. This is going to get done. If you don't know the stats, the first generation of enterprise ERP, the winner got 23, 24%. The second guy got like 19, 20. The first guy's a company whose name I can't remember. I think they're from Germany. And the other company is us. And the interesting thing is when you add those two numbers, you don't even get 50%. Because most of the ERP is from a blizzard of small companies or self-developed. And that's not the way this is going to work. So this has got too much opportunity for continued innovation. It's going to have to be scaled, it's going to have to be driven, and you're going to wind up with a leader, just like normal markets that you see where one player has more than 50% of this market. All right, next chart. One thing I should say about the old charts, because I think this might be interesting to you. Can you go back to the first set of predictions? Because I just want to give you an idea of when I said go back farther. Can you get back to the first set of ones? I think it'd be good. Yeah, here it is. This is if you take the data center one, corporate data centers decreased by 80%. Last year in this country, data centers decreased 15%. Back to my point about being late, 15% in 1 year. By the way, I didn't see that coming when I did this in 2015. This 80% of production apps in the cloud, today, 24% of the production apps are in the cloud. That's why I tell you, I'm probably, if anything, right in the destination, wrong in the time frame. So I don't know, for all of you that look at numbers, that always look at linear progressions, my sense is this actually has some level of geometric progression associated with it, as opposed to just being a linear projection. So this stuff is going to happen. All right, let's go back to the end here. I'm going to close up now because I can see the clock telling me stop talking. I do think companies are moving quicker, and if I'm right on the GDP side, it's going to free up capital to move faster. And I don't think this is a nice-to-have thing. I think this movement is one of these must-have, and you don't want to get left behind on it. Now, you can decide whether you want to move all at once or move slowly, but it is time to get moving. Now, our job is to try to help that. It isn't, if you're a user, by the way, I want to make sure I say this clearly, we have no intention of end-of-lifing any of our on-premise application products. I think a bad idea, bad strategy, we're not doing that. So we want to move at your pace. So if you want to take a long time to do that, that's okay with us. It wouldn't be competitively what I would advocate for moving forward. Obviously, I want you to stay with us. We want to do everything we can to help you, and it's our job to make that as easy for you, as painless for you, as simple as we possibly can.